the intro. Thank you, Sharina. So, welcome everyone. This is Trauma Informed Approaches and Domestic Violence Safety Planning. This is a training hosted by CAS, the Community Assistance Services Committee, and it is required by HUD for COC funded agencies to participate in this training because it is a very important topic. And we want to make sure that the people we're serving are getting trauma informed services, victim centered services, especially when it comes to safety planning, serving survivors of domestic violence who are also experiencing homelessness. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Maria at JBWS and Sam at the Morris County Sexual Assault Center as part of Atlantic Health for agreeing to offer this really important training for us. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves in just a second. Before I do that, I'd like to share an introduction to CAS for anyone who doesn't know us and might want to become involved. CAS is a subcommittee of the Morris County Continuum of Care Executive Committee. Our goal is to end homelessness. Members work collaboratively through a network of committees and subcommittees to achieve various goals. And we have regular presentations from local organizations who work with at-risk or homeless populations. We discuss barriers and gaps in the housing system and propose solutions to improve the system. So hopefully at the end of this training, you'll have more ideas on how we can work together to improve the system and maybe highlight some blind spots that we might have had about serving specifically survivors of domestic violence and people experiencing violence while homeless. So Sam and Maria, please feel free to take it away, share your PowerPoint, give a quick introduction of yourselves and what you do.
Well, Sam and I decided that I was going to go first. So
great. Hi, Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Lagatuda. I am the director at the Morris Family Justice Center, which is part of JBWS, the Family Justice Center. And I did share some resources that'll go out later. The Morris Family Justice Center has a separate website to JBWS, even though we're linked. But we are part of JBWS. We work with survivors of domestic violence, and we, here we go. That's what I need to share. Start sharing. Can everybody see that? Nope. I have to hit share. Yeah, I forgot. I have to hit share.
Yes, looks good.
Okay, now he can see it. Okay, good. Good. So what I was saying was the Family Justice Center, we are a walk-in center. We are at the court complex. And we do lots of safety planning with people who just walk in, who need support around safety planning and domestic violence. So I will get started. So this is going to be a little bit of like almost a DV 101, but how it relates to safety planning in general. So, there we go. So a little bit about intimate partner violence. Domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behaviors used to establish and maintain control over another person. It includes physical, sexual, emotional, mental, and economic abuse. It is prevalent in all groups, regardless of class, race, religion, culture, or ethnicity. One thing about domestic abuse or domestic violence is it also includes family violence. When people hear domestic violence, I would say 90% of the time they think it is a male partner, quote unquote, beating or battering a female partner. Yes, that's what we stereotypically see, but it's also family violence. It's also about power and control with family. A lot of times we'll see adult children use power and control over an aging parent, where they're not allowing a parent to have their medications or bring them to doctor's appointments or give them appropriate nutrition. So we will see that domestic abuse takes on a lot of different forms. The prevalence in terms of our typical domestic violence is that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 3 teens, and 1 in 7 men have experienced some type of domestic abuse or intimate partner violence in their relationships within a lifetime. So, safety planning. What is a safety plan? It is a personalized, detailed document that outlines specific strategies that a survivor can use to promote safety. I will say that we go into this anticipating that the person is the expert in their situation. So, what do survivors remember most after meeting with an advocate? Does anyone want to throw out some words? It's Tuesday afternoon. It's like, really, I have to talk? Honest, some words, understanding, passionate, empathetic, kind, patient. These are hopefully non-judgmental. These are hopefully all words that people, when they're meeting with an advocate to help safety plan, come up with. So, how do we safety plan? Oops, wrong way, this way. When we're safety planning, we want to define what safety means for the survivor. We want to ask them, what does safety mean to you? Just like I said, here I can go to the next. They're the expert in their experience. Oftentimes we'll have people who come and say, nope, I can't apply for a restraining order because that will escalate the situation. That will make things worse. I had supervision with a person this morning, and her client's concern is that there's a concern about the child going with the father. But I can't because he's going to escalate. He's going to get loud. He's going to become belligerent. Okay, so if you choose not to send your child to visitation, what are we going to do? So how do we have this dialogue and where that survivor can discuss their safety concerns? I'm afraid he's going to get loud. I'm afraid he's going to threaten me. I'm afraid he is going to get physical with me. So then we're going to talk to them about creating that personalized plans. So specific things, maybe some general things, as well as resources. And this idea of promoting not only safety, but autonomy. They know their situation better than I do. And then here's something important to know is that safety planning changes over time. It doesn't always look the same. So where today it may be, I am going to change my routine so my partner doesn't know where I'm going or what I'm doing or how I'm doing it. Maybe in a month or two, I can go back to where I used to go to church because I'm not expecting my partner to be there. We want to ask our people open-ended questions. We want to ask them, what has worked for you in the past? What has kept you safe in the past? And again, rely on them as the experts in their experience. So our goal of safety planning, we want to understand their perspective while integrating our knowledge of DV and trauma and resources. We want to partner with them. We are their advocate, but we want to partner with them. I will talk about this later, about why people don't leave, but sometimes leaving isn't always safe. Sometimes especially if there are weapons involved, especially if there have been threats made that if you leave me, I will kill you. It may not be safe. They may not feel safe. So really part of safety planning is we want to decrease isolation. We talk about how people who've experienced abuse kind of experience it in isolation. And once they get connected to a support group, they realize they're not alone. They learn tools from another human being. So we're trying to build that partnership and decrease isolation. One thing to be mindful of is bail reform. What is bail reform? Bail reform came around 4 or 5 years ago, where they will scale people on, have they been arrested before? Sometimes people have like what's called a zero score on their ODERA, and they're released the same day. That may escalate people, because if there are bruises on a person, in New Jersey, we have what's called mandatory arrest. So if, let's say, my partner laid their hands on me and left bruises, but had never gotten in trouble with the law before, they would arrest that person, but release them right away. In that time frame, is this going to escalate that person? Survivors sometimes have to wait at the police stations longer. This is a time where we could do additional safety planning, because what the police are doing is they are running those ODERA scores. They're finding out like what's their history, have they been arrested in the past. So during that time, the person who's experienced the abuse may be questioning their decision to be there. Or that is when we as advocates can help them safety plan. Do you have someone you can go to that's a safe person? Are you planning on going back with the person who caused abuse? If you are, who caused harm, I'm sorry. If you are, then let's safety plan. Let's make sure you're not in a room that there's sharp objects or that you can't get out of. So this has had some impact on safety planning. We use something called the danger assessment. It was developed by Jacqueline Campbell. She is at the School of Nursing at Johns Hopkins. She worked with victim survivors, shelter workers, law enforcement, and other clinical experts on domestic abuse. It helps determine the level of danger that a woman, and this was designed for women to be killed by an intimate partner. It's designed for heterosexual couples where the female is the victim, or single sex female couples. It's weighted score and interpretation. So I don't know if you can see, but it's within, if you can see some of this, has the physical violence increased in severity and frequency over the past year? Does he own a gun? So you'll see the gendered language. Have you left him after living together? Has he ever used a weapon against you? So it is weighted. So those scores where they're using guns, where he's ever tried to choke or strangle. And Sam, I don't know if you're going to talk about non-fatal strangulation, but okay. We know that people who use strangulation as a coercive control have an increased rate of killing their partners. So that is going to be weighted more highly than does he control your daily activities? That's going to be weighted less than has he tried to strangle. A lot of victims will use the word choke. However, choking is internal, like you're going to choke on my water or a piece of food. Strangulation happens on the outside, where I try to put my hands around you or smother with a pillow. And in July of last year, the Attorney General put out a non-fatal strangulation protocol for all counties, and ours started in February of this year. So anyone who is strangled, just like a SART exam, can go to the hospital within 5 days of the attack and be screened. So we will use this danger assessment in order to find out, like, what is someone's lethality? And if someone's lethality is higher because there's been strangulation, there's been threats to use a gun, we are going to safety plan with them differently. We're going to talk about, hey, do you want to go to shelter? And these are the high risk behaviors associated with increased lethality. The person who has used or uses abuse, they may be underemployed, they may be unemployed, they may have a low education level. They may have made overt threats to kill themselves. So again, we're assessing for lethality. We want to know what's going on. They may exhibit stalking behaviors. If I can't have you, then nobody else can have you. They own a gun. This one, I don't know why it has increased lethality, but if the partner hasn't lived with the survivor, there's an increase for lethality there. I don't know why that is, and that's probably something I should go back and check. Highly controlling behaviors, there's estrangement from the survivor. They've forced the survivor to have sex. They have a child who isn't the partner's, because now we're talking about split loyalties. Well, you can't love me because you're loving someone else's kid. And again, I mentioned before that they've strangled the survivor. People who have been strangled are 750% more likely to die by their partner or the person who uses abuse, which is why we really work to create that safety plan. So we want to work with that person. We want to identify where the survivor may most frequently encounter danger. So we're going to ask them, where are the places? We're going to ask about home, school, work, church, car, kids, daycare, all of this. We want to talk through some of these. So what are the risks in this location? And you're going to notice too that the questions that I put up are also open-ended questions, because we want them to generate the responses. Who are your allies in this setting? Who is someone who can help you be safe? What actions can you take to increase your safety? Notice too, we're asking them what works for them. We're not telling them what to do. Going back to autonomy. What are barriers to implementing the safety plan? What solution can we come up with? What can the survivor anticipate? Because crises only happen at 4:30 on Friday afternoon. We had a situation where I had to safety plan with a person. I believe it was her husband, was tracking her. And we were trying to get her to a friend who was safe. So we talked it through. Where can you go? Well, I need to pick up my kids from daycare. Okay, pick up your kids from daycare. Then what? So she met her friends at a grocery store and left her car there, because that would be okay. She'd been strangled by her partner. And then friends picked her up and kept her safe. So we had talked through all of that, because he knew, one, where she was supposed to go. He was tracking her car, and we wanted to make sure if he was tracking her car, it wasn't going to take him back to where the kids were. So again, asking these questions: what's worked in the past to keep you safe? So identifying, helping them figure out what has worked. Sometimes people are like, I just need to calm him down. I just need to make him feel better. Like if they're noticing that the partner's behaviors, if there's alcohol or drug use, what does that look like? What can you do if the violence starts? Do I call the police? Is there a phone in the house? Is there a cell phone? I will always tell people, try to put themselves by an outside door so that they are not cornered. When I do safety planning in the office, room that we do most of our intakes with people, it's a closed room. And there's only one way out. There's one door in, there's no windows. And I will like demonstrate, if you are in this situation, put yourself by the door, because what if your person is standing there? And I have seen people get visibly anxious as soon as I bring this up. So I will encourage people to stand by an outside door or take it outside, because they're not going to yell, because they don't want the neighbors to know if the violence is increasing. This idea of backing into the driveway, keeping it fueled with the cell phone charged and accessible. It's easier to get out if you don't have to reverse and then go forward. So I encourage people, back up, because then you just you can go. If you need to turn right, if you need to turn left because they're standing in front of the car, you can do that versus having someone behind the car. Keeping important copies of papers, kids' birth certificates, passports, immigration papers, all of that. Having it handy, having copies of it, because there's plenty of times where that's another tactic in power and control, is that someone will take the children's vital records so that the other parent can't have them. So I encourage people to make copies of that. Changing routines. If I go to the gym at 5 o'clock every morning, if I walk the dog at 5:30 every morning, and my partner knows that, are they going to follow me? So change up the routine. Maybe go to the gym at lunchtime if I go to work every day. Identifying those dangerous locations in the house. I know I referenced that earlier. The kitchen, the bathroom, the garage. The bathroom and kitchens, there's hard surfaces. The bathroom, there's no way out. If, again, think this small confined room, there's hard surfaces where someone can bang your head on a countertop. The kitchen, you have knives. So staying away from those, which is again why I encourage people, if violence is starting to escalate, try to get outside of the house. Plan an escape route for the people. Who are your safe people? Is it a friend? Is it a family member? And then being mindful of technological abuse. So I have Life 360 on my phone for my kids. My kids know where I am. Right. But if I don't want my partner to know, I'm turning off Life 360. You can also turn off GPS tracking. One thing I also encourage people to do is that in terms of technological safety, if their phone, if their phone battery is dying very quickly, or their phone is running hot, they should take it into, like, whether it's the Apple store or whoever their carrier is, to see if they can find anything, because what we have found is that tracking devices that are kind of like hiding in the background will burn out those batteries much more quickly. So encouraging people to get that checked out. As much as we can do all of this, we understand the impact of trauma on someone's brain. That executive function can be impaired. There was a study I think it came out of Texas probably about 10 years ago, where they really understood that victims of crimes did not remember things in chronological order, because their executive functioning became impaired in how they remembered because of this. That's supposed to be fight, not flight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And fawn, I like to say, is that like almost placating another person. Yep. It's not, it's just trying to placate, to like bring the escalation down. People will dissociate. So because of however they're encoding the trauma, their memories are going to look different. They're not going to remember it the same way. Here's the problem. Traumatic brain injury sometimes looks like a trauma response. So think about like why we safety plan. We don't want people in a bathroom or in the kitchen where their head may get banged. that can not only be the physical abuse, but now there's a traumatic brain injury. So there may be memory loss, there may be irritability. So recognizing that too. Headaches, double vision. We want to find out about like what is going on so that if they need medical assistance, we can do that. And then self-assessment for the helper. Does the individual feel safer now? And do they feel less isolated? Our role when we're safety planning is not to save the victim or stop the violence. Our goal is to help them be safer and to know how to connect to services that are available to them. So, why do people stay? Right? That's the question. Oh, why do they stay? Why do they stay? Scared. My person has threatened me that if I leave, they are going to kill me. What happens if I'm dead and I have children? Who's going to take care of them? Finances are another huge reason that people stay, which is why we safety plan around finances. You know, if someone's giving them an allowance, maybe take $5 that you can just save aside. Family, religion, and culture. My family of origin says, like, once I get married, I have to stay married for better or for worse. My religion says this, my culture says this. I promise I'm going to change. People do not get into these relationships thinking there's hope. When people get into relationships, they don't think this is going to happen. And then the partner goes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's the cycle of abuse. I'm so sorry. I'll change. A lot of times people don't know what their options are. They don't know that, oh, I don't know, there's a shelter. They don't know what the resources are. So let's stop asking the question, why do people stay? They stay for lots of reasons. And again, when we're talking about autonomy, they need to make that decision. I think I saw in the chat come up if we were going to share this. This is something that I like to share. It's called concern. If you notice, whether it's a client, a friend, a coworker, this is how you can kind of express what you're seeing in your concern. Don't criticize the relationship. You're seeing this. I'm noticing that, you know, you seem more isolated. I'm noticing you haven't reached out as much. No one deserves to be abused. This is all about confidentiality, right? I'm not going to go out and scream your name in the middle of the street, but I am worried about you. The thighs, right? The slide before. Why do people stay? There is so much shame when we ask that question. Well, why didn't you leave sooner? So how do we empathize? And then, are you safe? We need to make sure people are safe. And then name the problem. You know, is this a healthy relationship? There are other resources out there. And the questions we're going to leave for the end. So, and then those are just ways to get in contact with us. But I did, like I said, send some other information so everyone can have that. I will stop sharing. Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. I'm just going to pull up my screen in just a second. Are we all good? Can I see everything? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Maria. That was extremely, extremely helpful and very thorough. My name is Sam Dooley. I work at the Morris County Sexual Assault Center. I'm a clinician here as well as one of our prevention educators. So we're going to talk a little bit today, just kind of adding on to a lot of what Maria had shared. I'm going to briefly just go over what our services are and what we do here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sexual assault response team and services that might be available to people experiencing sexual violence that you might encounter in your work. I'm going to get into trauma-informed care and how, as whole organizations, we can make sure that we're having a survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach, especially when we're using a lot of these, great skills that we're learning. And then I'm going to end talking about one of my favorite topics, which is the impact of secondary trauma on us working in the field, and how to support ourselves and, maybe the staff that we work with. So this is a lot of presentations kind of squeezed into one. So if you want more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to tailor something to your organization, or to meet with you individually if you'd like more on any of these topics. So before we get into anything, I always like to give a self-care reminder. We're talking about sexual violence, and most of us have either experienced it ourselves or we know someone that's experienced sexual violence or interpersonal violence. So just take care of yourself, do whatever you need to do, come, go as you please. And please, feel free to reach out to me directly if you have additional questions. So the Morris County Sexual Assault Center, just kind of briefly going over our services, we're the state designated sexual violence program for Morris County. So if you work across counties, you might know that sexual violence programs and domestic violence programs in other counties, they're one organization. In Morris County, we're separate. So it's us and JBWS. We work really closely together, but we're not the same organization. So I always just like to be really clear about that, and the services we offer. That being said, we serve a lot of the same people because there's such a big intersection between sexual violence and domestic and interpersonal violence. All of our services that we offer, they are free, they're confidential, they're sexual violence focused. We specifically serve survivors ages 13 and older that live here in Morris County. And it's for people that have had any lifetime experience of sexual violence. So whether that's current, whether it's recent, whether it happened 20 years ago, we're available to support that person. We offer a variety of services, including free individual counseling with one of our counselors that all specialize in serving survivors of sexual violence. Also offer a variety of support groups. I'll say we also, in addition to serving people who've experienced sexual violence, we also offer counseling and group support to their loved ones. So that could be a partner, it could be a parent. So knowing that violence also impacts the people around survivors as well. And often those people are also in need of care and support and connection. This is just a little bit about our group and individual counseling. If you or someone that you know might benefit from our services, you can just call our office, and we're happy to give you more information. If you take nothing else away, just know that we have a 24-hour hotline. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For emotional support, someone's having nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, they need someone to talk to. Maybe they were recently assaulted and they need to talk about resources and what options are available to them. We are here. Our advocates are also available 24 hours a day to go with someone to get a forensic exam at a local hospital. That's anytime, day or night. I'll talk a little bit more about that process and how you can activate a SART response. We will also go with people to the police station as well if they want to make a report of sexual violence, which can really be helpful to people. Going to the police station, going through a legal process is hard, it's confusing, it's scary. So having someone with you who's confidential, that can be in those spaces, that can let you know what your rights are, can really be impactful. Like I said, I also do different types of community education. If you'd like a presentation for your specific organization, just reach out to me. We also run our Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition. So if you're interested in preventing sexual violence, specifically in our county, in our community, reach out to me as well. All right. So what is sexual violence? What am I actually talking about when I say that? So sexual violence is an umbrella term, and that covers any type of unwanted sexual contact that a person might experience. So that could include words or actions that are of a sexual nature that are without that person's consent. So that could include things like rape or sexual assault. It could include the sexual abuse of a child, the sexual assault by a spouse or a partner. I always include that. You'd be surprised how many people don't know that just because it is your partner does not mean that it was not sexual assault. Sexual harassment, which people can experience, whether that's at work, at school, or very commonly also in housing situations. So important for you all to know that sexual harassment can happen in housing. Sexual exploitation or trafficking, non-consensual image sharing, or unwanted sexual comments. So we can see that these are a really large spectrum. A lot of times people can experience all these different types of sexual violence at once, or maybe they've experienced it in different ways throughout their life. So just knowing that no matter how someone's experiencing sexual violence, all survivors deserve support, understanding, and specialized care. So in each county in New Jersey, we have what's called a sexual assault response team. And all that really is it's a team of people that are comprised of law enforcement, a certified forensic nurse, and confidential sexual violence advocates. Those are the people from our agency. So this SART team is activated or available after a recent sexual assault has occurred. And so essentially what happens when we activate SART, that is when the survivor is 13 years of age or older. In Morris County, if someone is under the age of 13, they'd be going to the Child Advocacy Center, that's Deirdre's house, for services. So these services are still available to young children. It's just that the process is a little bit different. So this is important because this actually recently changed in our state, which is really wonderful. So someone can get a forensic exam within 7 days of a sexual assault occurring. It used to be 5, and so it's been expanded so that people have a longer time to figure out how they want to move forward, which is a really great change. If someone discloses to you that they were recently sexually assaulted, they can activate the SART team by going to the police station, they can go to a local emergency room, or they can call our hotline in order to activate that. A survivor can choose to activate any members of the team that they choose. So what that means, what a lot of people don't know is they think that if they go to the hospital and report that they were sexually assaulted, that police are automatically involved, but that is not the case. So a survivor can choose to just get a forensic exam and have an advocate there with them. They can choose to just get the exam. They can choose to have police involved if they would like to, but it's up to that person. And all a forensic exam really is a way to treat survivors of sexual assault, as well as collect evidence in case that person does want to go through a legal process. They are free to the survivor. Again, they do not need to report to law enforcement in order to get these services. It'll include STI prevention, testing, and emergency contraception if the person wants those things. The survivor must consent and they can decline any part of the exam. So it's really up to that person how they want that process to look. People do not have to get an exam if they were sexually assaulted. It is an option that's available to them, and they can choose which parts of the exam they want to participate in. So it's available at our local hospital emergency rooms in Morris County, so Morristown Medical Center, St. Clair's, Denville, and Dover, as well as Newton. I will say this, if you work across the state, Every single emergency room doesn't necessarily offer this. So just being aware before you send someone to a hospital specifically to get a forensic exam, if that hospital does offer forensic exams on site. So just something to be cognizant of. And once someone gets an exam, that evidence can be saved now. Again, this is new in the state of New Jersey, for up to 20 years. So what that means is somebody has 20 years to decide if they want to take that evidence and they want to give it to law enforcement and they want to go through a legal process. So it gives people that flexibility. So it's important that people know this is an option that's available to them. So if you're safety planning and someone has told you that they were assaulted within the past 7 days, you can call our hotline. Our advocates can go over this entire process with them. And it's an option that people can get it and they don't have to make any other decisions after that. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and just get into trauma-informed care and exactly what that means. And so just going back a little bit broader, talking about trauma and what it actually is. It's something it's a term we use a lot, but often it people say it can be hard for them to define, especially when they're working with clients. So trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances, right? So it can be something that happens one time over a period of time. It is something that is physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and it has lasting adverse effects on that person's mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So these are really the only kind of guidelines around what makes something traumatic for someone. Okay, so it's a broad term, and important to know that it's really based on the individual and how we experience something and how it impacts us in our lives, right? And so that's going to look so different for each person. So an event that's traumatic for one person, another person, maybe they don't consider that to be traumatic, and that's okay. So just being aware, other things that could be traumatic beyond what we're talking about today in terms of interpersonal violence or sexual violence. It could also be things like getting into an accident, natural disasters, neglect or separation. It could be having a life-threatening illness, and then chronic stressors, what a lot of you all are working with people on. So things like poverty, racism, housing insecurity, all of those can be traumatic. So just being aware, especially if you're working with someone that's experiencing sexual interpersonal violence, and then maybe they also have a history of other traumas or chronic stressors, really being aware of using some of these trauma-informed approaches with people that have a more complex history of trauma. This is just a quote that I love and I love to put in my presentation. It says that traumatic events are extraordinary not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations to life. So unfortunately, trauma is not rare. It is common. Most people have experienced some form of trauma in their lives. So whether we know it or not, I think using a trauma-informed approach with every single person that we come in contact with is so important. So some common effects of trauma, and especially after experiencing a form of interpersonal or sexual violence, knowing that there's no one way that people respond to a traumatic event, but some common ways people might respond could include feeling fearful, being in shock, being numb. Something I'll say all the time is I've been with a lot of people when they were recently assaulted, and a lot of times people are just numb, right? Or they're hungry or they're tired, right? Sometimes we expect people to have a certain emotional response, and often that's not the case. So know however somebody's reacting, that's valid for them. People might experience feelings of guilt, shame, anger, self-doubt. We're going to go through some basic symptoms of PTSD, but also things like anxiety, depression, struggling with work, with school, with socialization, and struggling with things like sleeping and eating and meeting our basic needs can be really common. Knowing that trauma doesn't define someone's future, right? But it can be really helpful if someone's connected, especially to care that's specialized to what they're going through. Some common trauma symptoms that people might experience are really in these 4 areas. Some of you might recognize these as symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So the first one is feeling like the traumatic event is happening again in real time. And this can be things like memories, flashbacks, having nightmares. This is naturally how our brain responds to being triggered by traumatic things that remind us of the traumatic event. It can really bring those memories to the forefront. Knowing for that person, it can really feel like they're experiencing the trauma again. A lot of people don't know that avoidance is a trauma symptom, right? So avoiding people, places, anything that reminds that person of the traumatic event is a common response. It's a way that our body and our brain protect us from having extreme emotional reactions, right? It can even be just avoiding our thoughts, our own feelings, or our own memories. People will experience changes in their mood or their belief system. Often that looks like not feeling safe in the world, struggling to trust other people, having strong emotional reactions, feeling distant, and maybe not feeling interested in the things that they used to enjoy. We're going to get a little bit into physical reactions and how our body responds to trauma. But often that can look like feeling on guard, really hypervigilant, easily startled, and that affects things like our sleep, our appetite, and our ability to concentrate. So not everybody that experiences trauma is going to have PTSD symptoms, or maybe they don't experience any of these symptoms, and that's okay. Again, because everybody's response to trauma is so different, especially based on their lived experiences. But knowing that if someone is exhibiting some of these symptoms, that they all are natural responses. I think it's really important to talk about the ways that people cope with trauma, because a lot of these things can be really stigmatized and people can feel a lot of shame. But knowing that there's a lot of ways that people try to have control over their bodies, there's lots of ways that people are coping with really intense things that they've been through and ongoing symptoms. So that can look like things that often intersect with trauma, like substance use or disordered eating. Especially after experiencing sexual violence, it's really common that people might have increased interest in sex or intimacy, decreased interest in sex or intimacy. People might engage in risk-taking behaviors. So just being aware that these are exactly that. They're ways that people might cope with their traumatic experience. It doesn't mean those things don't need to be or deserve to be addressed. But often seeing those things as a valid response to trauma can help reduce some of the shame that people might experience when they're having a trauma response. Just some information about how our bodies might respond to trauma. So trauma impacts our bodies, and especially when we're talking about interpersonal and sexual violence, it's something that we have physically experienced. Right? So it makes complete sense that our body's going to have a response to that. So some things that our body just kind of naturally does when it's under threat are pretty much all of our systems that aren't necessary for us to survive shut down because we're under threat. Okay? So our body goes into safety mode. And that means a lot of things might be happening. Right? Our body's pumping cortisol to make it harder for us to feel pain, which might mean that we're more emotionally and physically numb. We're also going to release adrenaline to prepare for fight or flight or escape. So we might be extremely heightened. And like Maria mentioned, we might also feel on the other end, we might be frozen, dissociated, or immobile in order to protect ourselves from dangerous situations or terrifying emotions. Our heart rate increases, we sweat, our thoughts race, and those are all ways that our body is just trying to protect us. Our muscles tense, our breathing becomes shallow. I like to talk about this because it's just something to be aware of when someone's in the room with you and maybe they're experiencing fear or they're triggered. Their body might be having these kinds of responses. That's a natural response for their body to have. And there are ways that we can help someone through that, especially if they're experiencing, these kinds of trauma responses. So what can we actually do for people if they do disclose something to us or if they are coming to us, whether it's with a past or a current experience? So I think Maria described this so well. One of the biggest things we say to our advocates that are answering the hotline is, don't jump to problem solving if you don't have to, right? A lot of times what sticks with people is that they felt listened to, they felt heard, they felt validated, they felt like someone was actually, caring for them and what they were sharing. So if we have the time to really sit, validate, reflect what somebody's experiencing back to them, that can always be a really great place to start. Trying our best not to ask leading questions or questions that might be shaming. We obviously need to ask questions, especially in a safety planning process, right? But being aware of how we ask those questions, how we're setting up for that, explaining why we're asking certain questions to someone, right? Even just starting out with, it's important to me that you're feeling safe. I'm going to ask you some questions just so we can assess what your current safety is, right? Instead of jumping into asking a million questions, which can sometimes cause people to put a guard up, right? Or not feel believed. We talked a lot about assessing for safety already, and we're going to talk a little bit more about empowerment and how we can use that. Identifying symptoms as a result of trauma when we can. Using simple grounding techniques with people. It does not have to be anything fancy or anything that you've been clinically trained in, but just asking somebody if they want a cold drink of water, if they want to step outside to get some fresh air. Simple things like that can bring someone down from a trauma response. So just kind of the absolute basics of trauma-informed care. There's about 6 principles of trauma-informed care, and I'll send more information about this and the resources that are coming after the presentation. We spoke a lot about safety, but additionally, just thinking about things like power differentials, helping clients to meet their basic needs. Trustworthiness is really important. So knowing as an organization that building relationships and trust with people is prioritized, that we're transparent about the decisions that we're making and how we're able to help people. As much as we can, as Maria was talking about when building a safety plan, we're collaborating with the survivor to create what's going to work best for them. We're not telling them what to do, right? This is somebody that's power has been taken away from them. So it's more about how do we level power differentials by making shared decisions. Right? A great way to do this is also through peer support, connecting people with their peers, and having methods where clients can give us feedback about what is and is not working for them. Empowerment is really one of the biggest ones. when we're working with people to create feelings of safety. So we want to remember that the people that we work with are whole individuals with whole histories. They are not just the traumatic experience they're going through or they've been through, right? They have the ability to self-advocate. They have strengths. And those are all things that we can help someone to identify and to use for themselves. Intersectionality is part of every trauma-informed approach. So making sure that we're using culturally informed practices, that our services are accessible, and that we're receiving ongoing training and also engaging in self-reflection. We can't have trauma-informed care without culturally informed care. A change you can make to your practice right now today is just using more choice language. Being aware how we talk to people. Are we giving people choices? Are we asking people questions, even in how we're just framing and how we're speaking, right? When someone comes into our office, are we saying, sit in that chair? Or are we saying, you can sit wherever you'd like, where would you like to sit? Right? It sounds small, but it's really, really important. So I love talking about this. I think it is so important. I don't think it's talked about enough. For me, when I first started working in this field, vicarious trauma hit me like a ton of bricks, and I didn't have the words for what it was. And so I think being aware of this can be so important, and finding ways to mitigate it. So vicarious trauma, or sometimes it's referred to as secondary trauma, is a stress response that we as people that are working in the field may have after learning about the traumatic experiences of another person, whether that's we're hearing it from there directly, we're observing it happen around us, even if we're reading about it, that can happen a lot with like first responders that maybe are reading through really traumatic reports. And these are all vicarious trauma symptoms. I'm not going to read through them because they are essentially PTSD symptoms. So the exact symptoms that you may be working with your clients on, we can experience those same things, right? So maybe we're avoiding coming to work or certain cases. Maybe we're withdrawing from our loved ones. Maybe we feel really negative about the world around us, or we don't feel fully safe in our surroundings. So picking up on these symptoms within yourself, knowing this isn't just stress or burnout, it's more than that. And it's really important that as whole organizations, we're trying to make sure that we're preventing people from experiencing secondary trauma. So I feel like I could like shout this from the rooftops, but often when I learned about vicarious trauma, the emphasis was on individual staff self-care. And yes, that is absolutely important, but it's really important that we're working to prevent vicarious trauma at an organizational level. So that means how can we make shifts in our overall organization so that our staff feel supported and they're less likely to take on the trauma of the people that we're serving, right? So that can look like having open and respectful communication between staff, open door policies where staff can come to each other for support, having these overall helpful policies in place, like having good benefits for staff, employee assistance, competitive salaries, making people feel like we're invested in their long-term professional development and fulfillment. Creating policies, sitting down as a staff and saying, how can we prevent vicarious trauma from happening? What can we do? At my old job, we had a really simple policy, but it was just that you weren't allowed to eat your lunch at your desk. You weren't allowed to work through your lunch. And it helped us keep each other accountable. And if we saw somebody eating their lunch at their desk, we were like, hey, let's go in the break room together, right? Or let me cover the hotline so that you can take your lunch, right? Having on-site clinical staff to provide support or having peer support groups among staff so they have time to problem solve difficult cases or difficult situations they're encountering. Having things like appreciation events, recognizing when people are doing well, and having, ongoing wellness programming, even if it's just, taking time during a staff meeting to do something relaxing, right? I'm going to send a whole bunch of resources. There's lots of stuff out there. One thing I really recommend, and this is in one of the links, is there's something online called the Professional Quality of Life Scale. You can go on, it's a self-assessment, and you can assess yourself for secondary trauma, burnout, and compassion satisfaction. And it actually gives you like a score, and it shows you, areas that you might want to work on for yourself. So important to just constantly assess yourself for vicarious trauma, especially if you're working in a field and working with people with high amounts of trauma. Creating support for yourself inside and outside of work, meeting your own basic needs, reflecting and working on your boundaries at work. It's an ongoing journey for me. It's a hard thing, right? But important that we're prioritizing it. Getting a little bit into learning about self-soothing versus self-care. I sent some resources on this as well. There's some really great information out there about how to care for yourself in terms of mitigating trauma. All right. So all these resources I'm sending, so I won't go through them all. But there's this great resource if you work in an organization building cultures of care. It's through the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Like I said, the Professional Quality of Life Scale can be found here. This article, The Unspoken Complexity of Self-Care, is a really great one. And then just some additional reading about trauma-informed care. And this is my contact information. So if you'd like to contact me, I can also drop this in the chat as well. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies. This was a great training. I learned so much. I'm going to stop recording.